Welcome to the Black Barristers Network event, a Q&A with Chambers and Partners and the Legal 500, a barrister's guide to ranking. My name is Natasha Chatunde. I'm a barrister at Garden Court Chambers, and I'm also the co-founder and chair of the Black Barristers Network. For those of you who are new to the Black Barristers Network, we were founded in 2019 with the aim of promoting the growth of Black barristers through support, visibility, and community outreach. As well as doing events like this, which we do with the aim of ensuring that the excellence of Black barristers is recognised at the bar and in the legal profession generally, we also have a number of projects, including a mentoring scheme, a schools project where we speak to primary school children, and we also have a lot of external liaison that we do with other bodies such as the Bar Council, the BSB, the Ministry of Justice, and many others. In terms of our project that we've done last year, one of the major ones that we did was a survey on the experiences of Black self-employed barristers at the bar. The report of that survey, alongside other information about BBN, can be found on our website at www.blackbarristersnetwork.org.uk. If you have any questions, you can always email us at info@blackbarristersnetwork.org.uk, or you can use the Contact Us form on our website. Joining me tonight in chairing this event is the fantastic barrister, Abin Bonner-Johnson. She is at 25 Bedford Row. She's a committee member of the Black Barristers Network, and she's also my friend. Before I turn to her to talk about more information about this event tonight, I'm going to do some quick housekeeping with you all. You would have received the notification when you joined saying that this webinar is recorded. It will be recorded and it will be put on our website and our YouTube channel. As tonight is a Q&A, we're welcoming questions from the floor, and there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in which you should put your questions. You can also ask those questions anonymously if you wish to do so. The chat function is open, but it's mainly open for comments rather than questions, so please do try and put the comments in the Q&A. And just so you know, guys, this is being recorded in webinar style. So if you're in your pajamas and you're panicking that you're going to be seen in this recording, don't worry about it. It's just going to be our speakers on the recording. So I'll now hand over to Abby to talk more about this event.
Thank you very much, Tash, and thank you for my very sweet introduction as well. So what we thought we would do is just very briefly outline the reasons behind us hosting this event. And essentially, it was born out of a conversation between Tash and I, where we were talking about the processes that surround both of these leading directories, Chambers and Partners and Legal 500, and the fact that although many of us are self-employed barristers, a lot of us don't really take ownership of the process that is required to be included in either of the directories. And very often it can depend on the level of support or inclusion that you feel around the organisation that you are party to. So what we were hoping to do through this Q&A session and through the short presentations that both organisations have very kindly put together is to demystify the process and to provide everybody who leaves this webinar with a higher level of knowledge around what's expected of them and what they can do to get ready, but also to empower you with the conversations that you may have with your various clerks or marketing teams or whomever it is that takes the lead on these processes within your organisations. We're grateful to a lot of you for sending through your questions. We can reassure you that we're really going to emphasise the questions rather than anything else during this process. And so we're keeping the presentations quite short at the beginning of the webinar and hoping to retain at least an hour to concentrate on the questions. If you haven't sent a question through yet, feel free to send them, but many of you have, so we can already see that there's going to be quite a wide range of matters that we will cover. Tash mentioned the BBN survey that was completed last year and the quite full report that was written as a result of it, which you can access, and I'll put the link to that actually in the chat as well for ease of reference. But to take you through some of the points in particular that we thought we ought to highlight and we thought would really justify putting this event together. So, for example, 53% of the respondents that we had to the survey thought that the allocation of work in chambers had been negatively affected by their race, or they're at the very least uncertain as to whether it had been. Most respondents felt that they had high levels of encouragement from chambers to promote themselves, around 63%. However, almost all of the respondents who indicated low levels of encouragement were from our female respondents. 54% of respondents felt they'd been treated inappropriately by opponents because of their race, particularly for those who are more than 7 years cool. And of course, that can have a knock-on effect in terms of who to approach for references when you're trying to think of people that you've been in court with. 40% felt they received low levels of support from chambers in terms of career progression. And of course, that can feed into how you would approach your clerking team, how you'd approach your marketing team in terms of when you feel that you are ready to be considered for submission to these directories. And 50% thought that the support they received in career progression was negatively affected by race or uncertain as to whether it had been. So these were all indicators, we thought, which showed that sometimes there might be a lack of organisational support and a lack of processes in place to make sure that Black barristers in particular are able to find the ability or to dig into the effort that's needed sometimes to make these submissions. So we reached out to Chambers and Partners and Legal 500. We can happily say that both sets of organisations were very, very keen to participate in this event. I think there's a real movement within both organisations to make sure that it's as accessible as possible in terms of making it clearer and easier for individual barristers to really know what's expected of them for their submissions. And so in that vein, I will hand over first to the Chambers and Partners team to provide us with their presentation, which to outline their processes and general points that they think would be useful for you to have before they then hand over to Legal 500, and then we'll move into the Q&A session. So over to you guys at Chambers and Partners.
Thanks very much. Let me just share our presentation with you. I hope. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that now. And forgive me if I'm looking slightly to the side. I've got double screens, but I promise I'm not doing emails. I'm just reading some notes. Okay, so from Chambers and Partners, there's me, Eleanor Burt, and Eleanor Crundwell, and we're both deputy editors for the UK Bar Guide. And with us, we've got Katie Reed, who is a deputy editor for the UK Solicitors Guide, but nonetheless has lots of info to share with you. Very quick intro to our research cycle. We carry out our research between January and July every year, and a new guide is released in October. And this year we've actually got 3 submission deadlines, and a couple of them have already passed, but there will be a final one on the 7th of April for our research carried out in May and June. And you can have a look on our online research schedule for more details on that. Obviously, I'm sure you know, but the length of research for each practice area does depend on its kind of size and sophistication. So for something like crime in London or family law in London, we research these areas for 3 months each, whereas something like, say, one of our smaller sections for the Northeastern Circuit will run for only a month only. Okay, I think this is a crucial part. So anyone can take part in the submissions process, and it is free. So to participate, each set should upload both a submission document and a referee list per practice area, and then we'll use these to conduct all our research. I'll go over that in a bit more detail, but just a quick note to say you might find that you have slightly fewer cases perhaps to submit this year just because of all the disruption in the courts, which I don't need to go on about, but you can submit slightly older cases if that is the case for you, or things that you're working on now but haven't kind of come to court or whatever. But just leave us a note in the submission form if you'd like to explain anything about that. I think this is probably the most important part that I want to focus on, which is the submissions. And again, the most important part for us and the submission is really the case summaries, or work highlights as we call them. and each barrister can put forward 5 of those, each per practice area. And as for which barristers should be submitting, which is a very common question for us, any self-employed barrister in private practice can send a submission. Obviously, they should have a real focus on the practice area that they are submitting for. We do request that individual submissions are collated and uploaded by each set rather than by each individual barrister. And that is really just because we get such a huge number of submissions. And so it just has to be that way to kind of, for us to complete the research really. But if your set doesn't make a submission for a particular practice area, you can absolutely go through the process yourself and send in information for yourself under the heading of your set. It just needs to be 1 document per set. So you can be the only barrister on that list, that's fine. You don't need a clerk to write it for you. You can do everything yourself, but it just needs to come in under the name of your set. If you have any problems with that, kind of do let us know. I think we don't want anyone to feel like you can't sort of approach us or ask questions about the process, because it makes it easier for everyone if we all know what's going on. And if you need your set to, if you're kind of looking to convince your set to make a submission, it's a good idea to just emphasize that it's possible to be included in the guide without sending stuff in, but it's much more difficult. And it's really useful for us to have some information to start our investigative process. So, any information is better than no information. So even if you don't fill in all the boxes on the form, good to get something in. And you can include confidential information as well, just mark it clearly. The other point I think to make is just that if you've submitted before and not been included in the rankings, don't be disheartened. I know it's easy for me to say, but it can just be a case of time and us building up the information. So please do submit again if you are not successful the first time. Okay, this is just going slightly back to who can submit. There's no particular year of call. We've got an up and coming category in our rankings, which is for juniors at 10 years call and under. So we can consider barristers at any stage. And just on this slide here, don't forget the feedback section. We've got a section on the submission for feedback from you as an individual, also for the set, but from you, which can be, it can be any sort of brief feedback on your own ranking in the guide, but also anything else. So if you have had time to look over a section and you think there's someone we've overlooked, please do mention them on the feedback box, because we want that information, obviously. And finally, on submissions, there is space to include any recent parental leave or care responsibilities or reduced hours, anything which has kind of altered your practice. And we've got a leave policy actually, which is available on the website, and it gives you details of how your ranking will be protected in certain circumstances. If you've seen the submission form, you'll see that each barrister can send up to 5 work highlights or cases per practice area, and these should be pretty concise, summarise the matter, your role, and if you could explain why it's significant as well. So, if there's been a change in the law as a result of that case, then great. But, smaller bits of significance as well, an important client. And our submission also asks for leading and led by for each case. So if you're a silk and you led a junior, you can add your name into your submission. It's just a single box, you don't need any more details, but it really helps us to identify more junior barristers, even if they don't submit, and can help us identify more senior barristers who are regularly involved in important cases, but also might not submit. Again, just consistent confidentiality throughout. You're welcome to put down confidential matters, but as long as you mark them clearly. Okay, last bit from me. 3 crucial things that we look at when compiling our rankings: feedback from your referees, the submission document, feedback from your peers, that's other barristers, all very important. I mean, you know, feedback from the referees is obviously very important because this is kind of a first step really towards gaining a ranking in the guide. It's what sort of flags you up to us. Submission document, as discussed, we can see which cases you're in, great. And lastly, we speak to barristers from a whole range of sets about who they've dealt with and their experiences. So again, that's another important way for us to gather feedback. Just very briefly there, we've got comparative qualitative analysis. Don't know why I've got that on there because I can't say it, but essentially the bandings, the rankings, it's all on a comparative basis. We're looking to build a consensus around each barrister's strengths and weaknesses and the quality of their work, the work they do, and then that's what helps us create our bands.
Okay, so now I'm just going to talk a little bit about referees, because obviously along with the submission, this is the part of the process that you as barristers do actually have a little bit of control over. So we accept 5 referees per barrister per practice area. So for example, if you're submitting for both crime and POCA, you can put forward 5 referees for your crime submission and 5 for your POCA submission. These referees can overlap, or they can be 5 completely different referees. We would recommend that you do put forward 5 different referees because it's just the maximum number of people that we can speak to and sort of to maximize the feedback that we can pick up about your practice. If you do put forward more than 5, we will unfortunately only contact 5 referees just because we don't have the capacity to do any more, because we do the majority of our research through telephone calls. The most valuable referees for us are people who can speak about your skills in detail and from an informed perspective. In most cases, this will be instructing solicitors. Obviously, you might think that a Chambers rank partner does look good, but in reality, if you've actually worked with a more junior partner or an associate, and that's the person who actually really knows your strengths, then they are definitely a more effective referee. The other thing to note is sort of how well the referee knows the market is something that's really important to us. And yeah, the most valuable referees are those people who've worked with multiple barristers and can provide the comparative view that we're looking for. We'll only reach out to the referees once in a research cycle, just to make sure that we're not bothering people, because obviously they're giving up their time to speak to us. We'll make contact with them by email and request sort of 15 to 30-minute phone call, just depending on how many barristers they have been referred by, and then we'll cover all the referrals in that one phone call. Obviously, most referees are instructing solicitors, but you can put forward non-clients. Peers as referees are sort of a particularly good idea if you're working for the GLD or the CPS and you're really struggling to find instructing solicitors who are either willing to or able to act as referees. It's also a good idea to mention this on the submission if you can't put down any instructing solicitors, just so we're aware that that's why we're not going to be picking up feedback from solicitors about you. So yeah, a few best practice tips about the referees you're going to be putting forward. Yeah, basically check with people whether they're happy to speak to us, if they've got time to talk to us, and yeah, most important, whether they've worked with you recently. So they can actually give us proper up-to-date feedback on what you've been doing recently. We don't mind if it's long-standing clients or new clients, just as long as it's somebody that can speak about your skills. This is mostly just because the questions that we ask the referees, we'll be asking them questions about the work they've done with you, and what they thought of your performance, sort of the quality of your written work, the oral advocacy, if that's relevant to the case. We'll also ask about client service, and this is both in reference to your own client service and also the service that your solicitors received from the set and the clerks. This is just sort of whether you're responsive, good in conference, things like that. And yeah, as Eleanor mentioned, we do speak to peers as well. We commit to interviewing at least one barrister from every set that submits in each practice area. And we do choose the barristers because we aim for a 50-50 split of male and female interviewees. We also make sure that we speak to roughly an equal number of silks and juniors to make sure we get a nice view of the market. Because we choose the interviewees, obviously it has absolutely no effect on the rankings if we decide to speak with you or not. And yeah, you're not disadvantaged if you don't get picked for a phone call. So the questions that we ask in these interviews are about the market, any trends that people have noticed over the last 12 to 18 months. We'll also ask barristers about your own practice and speak about any barristers in your own set. And then we also ask people to speak about the rankings and anybody else they've dealt with in the market. So the reason is because obviously you as barristers, you know the market really well, you know each other. And the feedback, as it is with the referees, is all completely confidential. And even though it's confidential, we've honestly found that people are really honest when they're speaking about their peers and are really happy to speak positively about other barristers they've worked with, even people they've been in cases against and might not have come out the other side in such a successful way. We do occasionally pick up a bit of negative feedback, but this is always taken with a pinch of salt. And we're really aware that people have sort of personal vendettas against some people. And so the only time that negative feedback really comes into it is if it's consistent and coming from multiple different sources. Yeah, as Anna mentioned as well, in the submissions, we ask for the leading and led by, because it helps us to highlight up and coming barristers. And we've also found that during these interviews, it's a really good way to find out about the up and coming barristers in the market, younger people who might not be putting in submissions. And it helps us to keep an eye on those barristers and we can watch them as their careers progress.
Okay, and I'm just going to touch a little on how we consider diversity and inclusion in our research. So firstly, I just want to say that diversity and inclusion is a core value at Chambers, and we're constantly looking at ways to improve not only our rankings, but our own organisation. We do have a dedicated DNI team who are working on both our external and internal initiatives. We have our equal opportunities policy, and we're currently putting together our ethnicity pay gap report and are actually monitoring through forms who is applying for jobs and who is successful, again, to see where we too can make improvements. We're also trying to educate and empower ourselves, and a lot of this is also coming from our Inspire committee. Oh, I'm really sorry, my microphone doesn't seem to be working again. Does this, oh. Can you hear me now? Yep, okay. I don't know why it's so patchy, my apologies. Right, so as I was saying, we're also trying to educate and empower ourselves. We have our Inspire committee who put on events for the company. Our editor-in-chief, Rita Ghosh, is the executive sponsor for our cultural inclusion group, and they've recently organised a panel discussion with Leslie Thomas and Alexandra Wilson for Black History Month. And we also had a speaker event for the US Black History Month. We're also currently marking LGBT History Month as well with a series of events. And we also have other strands, including gender, mental health and wellbeing, etc. More externally, we also have our Dni Awards, which have been in place, I think, since 2019. And here we are trying to highlight those who are driving change within the industry. I believe last year's winner was Leslie Thomas. And we're also putting together various pieces of digital content as well. A recent podcast was Catalyst for Change with Dr. Tunde Okawale. But then how this affects our research, I've just put together a short slide here. So set-wide diversity statistics, we're asking for this and we would really encourage sets to fill this out. Unfortunately, we've not had quite the level of engagement that we had hoped for. So I would also like to encourage everybody here to encourage your sets as well to take part and to give us this information. This link is included on the template, so it's available easily, but it only needs to be filled out once per research period. We also have a Dni survey specific to the bar guide, and basically we're asking for the same sort of information as would be given to the bar standards board. As has been mentioned, we are also aiming for a 50. So we're also aiming for a 50-50 gender split in interviews. We actually noted that this had an immediate impact in representation, specifically on the solicitor guide. We actually saw an 11% increase in women with top rankings just from the 2020 to 2021 guide. So again, this is something that I would really like to encourage you to ask within your own sets, that if we ask for a specific person, we would like to speak to that person. We've just found that this really lessens the echo chamber effect, and we were able to gather feedback from and about a more diverse range of lawyers. And then in terms of DNI initiatives and diversity champions, you may have, some of you already heard about this, but we've been asking about internal initiatives as well, again, to just have a better understanding of programs within the legal sector. We'd also like to invite you to tell us about your diversity champions. It's something we'd like to include in editorial to support and promote those individuals as well. But I would also stress that this does not come into consideration when we're making ranking decisions. The leave policy, as Eleanor Burt mentioned, you'll find this in section B7. So again, this is space to let us know of any recent leave of absences. This is so we can consider it when analysing the rankings. Detailed explanation is available online. I've included the links here. So we'll hold rankings for a year or two as appropriate concerning parental care leave or health-related absences. And again, this is confidential information. It's only for internal use. We also have our zero tolerance statement. Again, I have a link here with a detailed explanation, but in short, as an inclusive organisation, we always expect our colleagues to treat each other and those whom they're interviewing, our clients, with respect. And we also ask this in return, and we will not tolerate inappropriate behaviour. In terms of ongoing training, we're providing this to researchers on a continual basis to help empower them with their research, with their editorial. And we also do have an open dialogue or an ongoing dialogue with the Bar Council and other organisations. Yeah, so I hope this has been useful for your understanding of our approach to research. Of course, if you have any further questions, we're more than happy to help where we can. And you can also find more information at diversity.chambers.com. Thank you, and apologies again for the mic. I'll hand over now.
Thank you very much, Chambers and Partners. I did see that in the Q&A section there was a question which I think we can deal with now. It was just to ask if Eleanor C could quickly just repeat what the questions are that Chambers asked referees, and then we'll move over to Legal 500.
Yeah, so we'll start off just by asking the referee what work they've done recently with the barrister, and then just ask them what they thought the barrister's strengths were, if they had any weaknesses, what they thought of their oral advocacy, if that's relevant, and then the client service in relation to both the barrister and the set as a whole. Obviously, if it's an instructing solicitor, we'll ask that. If it's another barrister, that obviously wouldn't be asked. And then, yeah, we also use the referee interviews to try and gain as much information as possible. So then we'll also ask about other barristers that referee has worked with. And yeah, just pretty much the same questions would just be asked, just so we can gather as much feedback as possible from each interview.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll hand over now to Will and Ella from Legal 500.
Hello there, my name is Will Tolsher. I am the new bar editor of the Legal 500. I am responsible for all independent referral bars worldwide. Also joining me today is Ella Marshall, who is our chief editor. So this is a reasonably brief introduction, so I'm aware that many of the people on this seminar will have some degree of familiarity with the research process, and I'd like to keep this as interactive as possible and leave plenty of time for some questions. In terms of the rankings that we operate, the structure is reasonably simple. We have a leading sets table, we have a rising stars table, which for the upcoming research process will be 2014 calls and more junior, a leading juniors table, a new silks table, and a leading silks table. In terms of the factors that we take into account, we do have a lot of crossover with a lot of other publications in terms of how we factor in. The key change that we identify this year is due to the effects of COVID in certain practice areas, such as criminal law. We are now looking for work over the past 18 months rather than the past 12. The case highlights are the primary factor in the research process, but we also take into account referee feedback. To underscore, the key areas are, in first, the work highlights, and secondly, the market feedback, roughly in that order, although we would say that both are necessary to succeed in the research process. Set rankings are often calculated based on the collective strength of the set across all levels of seniority. We look for both established senior practitioners and successful junior practitioners across the area when looking at set rankings. Our referee process is somewhat different to Chambers and Partners. We contact referees primarily via email. This allows us to contact the best part of 500,000 referees per year and contact them across time zones. So we're able to have a much broader spread of referees. Seniority is not a large factor at all. We would encourage you to put the people who you have dealt with most in your work. We do not want to use the bar feedback process to influence how we see the structure of solicitors' firms. And although with that in mind, when it comes to the referee process, we are not just looking at instructing solicitors. We are looking at also opponents and those who you will also come across, such as experts and similar. We are aware that there are many clients, such as the GLD and the CPS, which don't accept reference. Provide references, we are happy to work on that basis. We would also encourage you to put that in your submission. To underscore, there is no limit to the number of referees you can contact for Legal 500. It makes it no more difficult for us if you nominate a larger number. Indeed, the guideline figure that we typically give is 15, but to underscore, that is a guideline rather than the minimum. That will often be variant based on the nature of your practice. We're aware that there are some areas where you may be involved in a smaller number of longer cases, some areas will be a larger number of shorter cases. It's very much is practice area dependent. Our interview process includes interviews via VC and telephone. In the past, COVID permitting, face-to-face interviews were very much the core of the research process. We are the only legal directory that pre-COVID sent researchers out internationally to meet law firms and counsel, and we interview both members of chambers and clerks. We don't suggest individual interviewees. We do leave that up to the discretion of sets, but we do encourage them to put forward a mix of silks and juniors. We also would encourage sets to make sure that those who are put forward for interview are aware of the methodology to a limited extent, but other than that, there's no particular preparation that we specifically encourage. In terms of what not to put in the submission, the one thing that I would identify is that we don't factor in other rankings and awards. we want to keep things based on our evidence-based research process rather than duplicating any other publication. So we don't necessarily, we wouldn't necessarily bear them in mind. Our submission template is reasonably detailed and includes a lot of room for information on the detail of each case. So don't be afraid to provide us with technical detail and really make it clear why each individual matter is different. Also, we do keep a reasonable focus on each individual practice area. So if in doubt, look at existing editorial to understand how we are considering the scope of each practice area. And we always welcome feedback on our coverage post-launch, and we try and give detailed responses. We do ask you to submit them through www.legal500.com FAQs, and we will get back to you as soon as we can after that. That's it from me. I'm happy to answer questions in the upcoming session. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for that, both teams. That was really, really helpful. So now we're going to come into the Q&A, and as you can see, there are a number of questions that have been put in there. But one that could be a good one to start with would be, what are the benefits of being listed on your directories? I think it's a particularly good question because I'm sure there are some people at the bar, particularly Black barristers, who may feel a bit hesitant in applying. So it'd be good for us to know what the benefits are for us. And if we could start with Chambers and Partners, that would be great.
Yeah, so basically the benefit of being listed in the directory is that it's just external verification that you are a good barrister. I mean, we're living in an age where you can Google anybody now. And so if a client doesn't know you, they're probably going to Google you. And this is just a way to show that you are a good barrister. It's been really traditionally hard for barristers to promote themselves, but this is, you know, an avenue that you can use to promote yourself and show that you are sort of a standout amongst your competitors. Yeah, obviously there's no guarantee that you will pick up work from this, but I mean, it's can't do any harm, I suppose, to show that people sort of your clients do rate you, and obviously we have all the client testimonials as well, include examples of your recent work. So yeah, it's basically just to show that you are sort of a recommended person.
And anyone from the Legal 500? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with the point about external verification. And also just to add that the way the directories are used, they can be by instructing solicitors just to kind of check you out, really, as that kind of service when they're appointing, looking at panel appointments and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I would say it's quite an important and crucial part, really, of the whole process.
Great, thank you. So I think the next questions that we have on the list have been covered actually by the presentations from both teams, which are around the first time that you should make your application and advice to those who are slightly more senior, whether your chances decrease seniority. So I'll move to the question after that, which is, could you please give us examples of the types of cases and the types of practice that you would expect for each level in your directories? So I know this might be a trickier one to answer given the range of practices that you guys consider in the ranges of areas, but maybe if you pick a specialism and then give some specific case examples of what have landed people into different levels within your directories, that may be going to the heart of the question. And again, we'll start with C&P and then always go to Legal 500 afterwards.
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, as you say, this is quite a tricky one to answer because there isn't really a kind of entry level of work, and it will definitely differ between practice areas and circuits. So I think we would kind of struggle to, you know, cover this really, but all I can kind of say really is you will know what the market that you're working in. So send in your 5 best examples, you know, your most complex cases, and tell us why, as long as they're within the practice area definitions, which you can obviously find online. You're very welcome to get in touch with us if you kind of need any clarification on what is and isn't included. And I mean, I would say, if I could pick, you know, for example, the planning section is one that I look at. And so, you know, if you're kind of in the top bands of that section, you're likely to be in some of the kind of headline things, you know, Heathrow, I'm thinking of, and those sorts of cases where, I mean, that's obviously a practice area where there is a lot of press around the kind of big cases. That's not always the case. But yeah, I would say, please get in touch if you need any clarification, but essentially put forward your 5 best cases and we will do the rest.
I'd agree that it's a very practice area by practice area question. We have over 60 practice areas in the London Bar alone. So what we would be looking for in a lot of areas is sort of perhaps the more headline setting and the most legally challenging cases. Indeed, it would typically be the case in many practice areas, but not all, that the hallmark of an elite silk practice would possibly include leading in Supreme Court cases in that area. But again, that is very variable, as there are a number of practice areas where Supreme Court cases are few and far between.
Thank you for that. The next question that we have is, what are the best ways to ensure entry? Now, you've already sort of discussed some of those factors within your presentations, but the part of that question that I find particularly interesting is, does outside court activities attract entry at all? I'm assuming outside court activities might be things like being on panels of the Bar Council, or doing things like being the chair of the Black Barristers Network. Are those sorts of things that are considered?
Tash, do you include being shortlisted for the Diversity Champion Awards as well?
Yeah, and being awarded, what was it, highly commended? Yeah, it's on my wall actually, it's just there to see. Thank you so much, Chambers and Partners. So if you guys want to start with that one, that'd be great.
So unfortunately, no, that sort of thing would not really be considered when we're doing the rankings, because when we're looking at doing the rankings, it's a client's guide, so we're looking at your skills and your strengths as a barrister. Those sort of outside activities, obviously, as you know, might qualify you to win one of our diversity awards if it's diversity related work that you've been doing. It's always worth mentioning this kind of thing on a submission, just because we might also include that in the editorial. That's something that we're considering doing in the future, because obviously we're trying to pick up a lot more information about sort of things that people are doing to aid the profession as a whole. So it's always worth mentioning, but no, the rankings themselves, we will solely be looking at the work you've been doing and the feedback you pick up from your referees.
Again, it's a similar position with the Legal 500. The work is the fundamental keystone of the research process, and the referee process is secondary, sort of second feature to that. We wouldn't put any real significance into activity outside of court, but it is worth mentioning, certainly in the submission.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to roll up 2 questions in one, because I think I'm hoping they're quite short but related to one another. And these are around referees. So the first one is, what happens if none of the referees respond? Do you inform the barrister of this and give them the option to provide new referees, or are their applications simply unsuccessful? And then secondly, are referees who are ranked seen as more valuable than those who are not? And if so, why? And I think this is an interesting one, because I know in the discussions that we've had with both of you, a point that Natasha and I highlighted was that it seems to us that legal aid solicitors, which is where you see a higher concentration of Black solicitors firms, tend not to be listed as at the same rate as private concentrating solicitors. And so it may be, for example, that a Black barrister who is regularly instructed by legal aid firms and so on, we know there's a higher concentration of of Black practitioners in legal aid areas may therefore be drawing their referees from pools of solicitors who are not listed in the directories. Would that have an impact on their applications to you guys?
So it does kind of vary with practice areas, but essentially, no, if somebody is not ranked with us, we won't sort of just discount our feedback, and we're well aware of the fact that sort of across crime, there's a lot of solicitors firms that we don't rank that will definitely be handling really big cases and instructing top barristers. So it's obviously it's the quality of the feedback that matters the most. If somebody is ranked, obviously we definitely will be listening to them. I mean, if there's a top silk saying this junior is absolutely outstanding, that is going to carry a lot of weight. But I mean, if you're getting 7 amazing comments from unranked solicitors, we're definitely not going to discount that. Just if the referees don't respond, unfortunately, we're not really able to let you know about that, just because we don't have the time to get in touch with everybody, and yeah, to allow people to put in extra referees, just because the researchers are already kind of working to capacity with the number of referees that we do have. We'll try really hard to get in touch with everybody, and if there's been a particularly low level of feedback in certain practice areas, we will definitely reach out, sort of send reminders, try and get in touch with people. You can always reach out to the researcher. I know a few sets of chambers and law firms do reach out to the researcher just to sort of get an idea of how many referees have responded, just so they know if they do need to get the barristers to do some chasing. But I mean, it's always just the best practices to let your referees know when the research is starting. And you can see that on our research schedule, just to give them a bit of prior warning. And that we normally find that that really helps to kind of boost the response rate.
And I have to say a very similar answer from us as well. Unfortunately, we can't resource additional resends, well, in terms of the referee feedback rates. But again, please give your referees a heads up regarding the process. Let them know it'll be an email, ask them to check spam folders, all that kind of thing really on that side. And then in terms of who you're putting forward, please don't get too concerned about it. I mean, my day job really is on EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East and Africa, more on the law firm side. And just to give you an example, we had one GC who was put down 77 times by law firms. I mean, that individual is never going to take part in the survey or answer. So just kind of have an eye on how popular they might be and who might respond as well. And yes, not really something we're considering whether the individual's firm is ranked or not.
So the key really as the practitioner is to make sure that you're putting forward referees who you think are actually going to respond, and to bear in mind what the research timetable is, so that maybe you can send off an email to them or drop them a message just to encourage them to get back to you guys. So I'll because I'm dealing with referees, there was a question which has come up which has said, do you accept judicial referees from people? And also, I know that Legal 500 made it quite clear. I'm sorry if I missed this, but chambers and partners, could you also just specify whether you give equal or different emphasis to the case lists versus the references that come through?
Yeah, so we will get in touch with anybody that you put forward. It's just a matter of whether they're actually willing or able to speak with us. So we find that often sort of organizations have policies about not speaking with us, but occasionally you'll get somebody who's so keen to give feedback on that barrister that they'll break the policy. So it's always just worth checking with the referee before you put them down. We find that judges are often not willing to participate. So I would, yeah, just check with them. And then if they're not willing to speak to us, don't put them down, because it's just a waste of referee. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
It was just to ask what balance you guys give between case lists and referees.
It's fairly equal. I mean, it obviously depends on the practice area. For example, if somebody is really struggling to put down referees, then just make that really clear on the submission. And so we know not to rely heavily on the referee feedback. Otherwise, sort of, if we don't know, we might be thinking sort of, why has this person struggled so badly to put down any referees? Why have they not got any solicitor feedback? Why are they not picking up feedback from anybody at all? So, I mean, it really depends on the practice area, because obviously there's certain areas where people will be working with clients that can't speak with us. But yeah, I would say always just make it really clear on the submission if that's the situation that you're in. And yeah, was always happy to speak with anybody if they're struggling, and just sort of give them some guidance as well.
Our experience at the Legal 500 is very similar when it comes to members of the judiciary acting as referees. They're generally not too keen on participating. That said, arbitrators are often a different story, but the only thing I would warn is they then may ask you to be a referee if they participate in our arbitrators research process.
Okay, so as I'm sure everybody in the audience is aware, and our panelists are aware, there are a number of Black barristers who are sole practitioners. Equally, there are a number of Black barristers who are in sets of chambers that aren't as massive as Garden Court or 25 Bedford Row, although in terms of Garden Court, I think it's easy. Most chambers are not as big. We have so many people. So my question, the next question is, how does this guide assist sole practitioners not working in a traditional set of chambers? And perhaps maybe to wrap it up with the next question after that, if someone is not supported by their chambers, for example, if their chambers is a small chambers and does not sort of subscribe to the ranking system, can they make independent individual submissions to the directories?
So I think for the first question, yes, sole practitioners are welcome to make a submission just as normal, follow the process, put forward referees. It might be the case that some of the questions on the submission form are less relevant because they refer to, you know, a set as a whole, in which case absolutely fine. So yeah, just as normal. And again, if you need kind of any extra help, and if you need more kind of support with that, then you're welcome to get in touch as a sole practitioner. But as long as you are an independent self-employed barrister in private practice, then great, please send in information as you would if you were a set. And yeah, I think I hopefully covered this about making individual submission in the presentation, and the answer is you know, yes, you can, but it does need to be under the name of your set. So the process is that a set can send in one document and one list of referees per practice area. So it doesn't matter if that is just for one person, but it does need to be done on a set-by-set basis. But again, we're here to answer any questions if anyone, you know, is in that situation and needs some help.
Similarly, we are happy to receive submissions from chambers of all size, from sort of 1 to the hundreds. So we rank several sole practitioners in the guide, and we very much like receiving submissions from them. So it's certainly not a bar to participating in the research process.
Thanks for that. And another question, is the guide applicable to employed barristers in private practice? We do have a number of Black barristers who are employed in private practice, so that will be very helpful for them.
So unfortunately, we do only rank barristers who are self-employed and in, so people who are part solicitors, unfortunately, we can't include those in the guide. You just need to be an independent self-employed barrister who's qualified at the Bar of England and Wales. So I'm sure that does exclude a few people, but unfortunately, that's just sort of the cutoff we've had to have. I know there are a few sort of specific situations with certain sets of chambers that sort of are on the line and unsure whether they can be considered. So we'll treat those on a case-by-case basis, and it's always well worth getting in touch with us if you think that you should be included but aren't. So yeah, just definitely, it's always worth just staying in touch and letting us know your situation.
We certainly very much look forward to hearing from barristers who are employed by law firms, but that would be as part of the submission process for that law firm in our law firms coverage, as distinct from the bar coverage. We do include a number of them. They can be ranked in as leading individuals. Indeed, that has been the case, and we do take into account previous bar rankings if people move from the independent bar to the employed bar and vice versa. On the subject of ABSs, we generally treat these on a case-by-case basis, effectively looking at how individual ABSs operate. But if it would be the case that they were not a good fit for the bar guide, they would participate in the law firm's guide. So we try and make sure that no practitioner would fall between the two.
That's great to hear. So there's some flexibility there, and I think the spirit of what you've both said is, if there's doubt, get in touch and see if it can be clarified by doing so. So what we will do is we'll circulate some contact details for both Chambers and Partners and Legal 500 after the event, if any of these areas touch upon factors that you would like to follow up with them on. So the next question, which I think is quite an interesting one, is, would you say the purpose of your directory is that it's competitive or that it is inclusive? And I guess I could add another category here, or would you say it's a mixture of both, that you want as many people on there as possible, but it still has a competitive sort of nature to it, as after all it is a ranking process?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if that's not too much of a cop-out, both, yeah. Because as you say, I mean, the purpose is to include the best people for each practice area in the guide, so that is competitive. And you know, we're here to kind of make sure that instructing solicitors can kind of make an informed decision using that list. But you know, it's not kind of non-inclusive in the sense that we will consider all applications. So you know, and it's free to apply, and we'll look into everyone who sends a submission, and also lots of people who don't. But yes, so that is kind of the inclusive aspect, I suppose. But yeah, it is a competitive process, and that's kind of what the guide is all about, after all. You know, the best of the best.
Yes, the similar principle at the Legal 500. The fundamental for us is to reflect the market as it currently is, and if that means we are holding up a mirror to failures in diversity and inclusion, we're holding up a mirror to them.
I think Tash and I were like, who's going to get it?
I think we're now looking at each other because we both turned our mics off at the same time. Like, which one of us is going to go?
I'll follow up after.
Fine. All right. So the next question that we have is on statistics, and we want to know what percentage of Black practitioners who have made submissions are then listed, and what percentage of white practitioners who have submitted are then listed, whether you have those statistics and what they are, and if not, whether you're going to be getting those statistics in the near future.
Okay, so we don't actually have those statistics at the moment, but we are starting to engage more with sets on race and ethnicity through the diversity stats that we're asking for on the submission and the Dni survey that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, again, we'd ask you to encourage participation with this, and of course, talk to us about anyone that you feel has been particularly overlooked. You know, we're here, we're happy to keep the dialogue open.
We don't have these statistics, and we don't feel we'd be able to generate them without asking for specific details in the submission process, which I imagine that quite a lot of people may not be comfortable providing.
Okay, so this follow-up question I think sort of leads on from there. A slightly more challenging question, I think, which is, why are there a number of chambers which are ranked in top bands and yet have very little or no diversity? So I think what the question is asking really is, why is it that there doesn't appear to be an emphasis on the requirement for diversity and inclusion, as part of the factors that can contribute towards somebody being in the top areas. I know that diversity and inclusion is important to both the directories. So do you have any plans on incorporating that into the ranking process rather than seeing it as a separate area to be considered outside of the ranking process?
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, it isn't what we would like it to be. But we are actively working to try and improve that. At the end of the day, we are trying to show the capabilities of the top barristers, the top sets, etc., etc. But again, I would really go back to the point I made with the gender split in interviews. I know that's not necessarily the ideal solution, but again, we're trying to cut that echo chamber and move away from it. And we're asking for that representation. We can only ask then that we are given the stats that we're asking for to help us inform our own initiatives and, you know, see what we can do better, where we can work with firms and sets more. So again, I'm just asking you to encourage internally as well on that side.
Yeah, we just don't think there are so many practice areas where we're seeing a significant amount of diversity in the submissions. And our view is really that we're kind of holding up a mirror to the realities in practice. But of course, if we are to see more, then we hope this would also come through.
Can I ask, just as a follow-up to that, before we move on to the next area, given what you have said, and given the kind of what you're seeing in the fact that there is this kind of lack of diversity, are there any particular things that you are doing as directories to actually encourage the companies who are submitting to you to really consider their diversity practices? So for example, with barristers' chambers, you can quite regularly see pictures of the members of chambers. So even if you don't have the statistics yourselves, if you go to the websites, you can identify the people of colour that set of chambers has. Do you then pursue that? Do you then go out of your way to ask them, we haven't actually seen this person being put forward or these people being put forward, we wondered why. Is there anything that we can do to encourage them to apply? Or do you want us to give any talks? Do you guys do that in terms of outreach and proactive management of that aspect of people not actually even being put forward by their companies, by their chambers?
Okay, so one thing I would mention is that we are looking at Dni data from sets and Bar Council where we haven't been given the data. I know there's more, we're looking at more that we can do, but you know, we're actively involved in webinars to create platforms for discussion, you know, on the Dni front. So sorry, it's quite a tough one. We're putting as much as we can in terms of digital content out there as well. I don't know, Eleanor, or either one of the Eleanors, if there's anything you wanted to mention regarding bar specific research.
Yeah, I think the only thing really just to emphasize is that, as Katie says, we're kind of we're carrying out our research, which is based on the submissions and the referees and the feedback and all that kind of thing. And then, yeah, as part of that, we definitely want to find out more and work with everyone at all sorts of different sets of different levels and different practice areas to kind of work with them to make sure that we're being as representative as possible. So yes, part of that is us requesting these statistics. And as Katie says, part of that is us trying to find out if we can. I mean, I think we have kind of steered away from looking at a website and making our own judgments, because I think, you know, it's harder to do that really and come to kind of conclusions, which is why we're going down the sort of stats route. But yeah, I mean, definitely events like this and others, you know, we're obviously happy to do and get a lot out of them ourselves. So yeah, hopefully as we progress, we can kind of do more and get more involved as well.
Thank you for that. Oh, sorry, Will, please go ahead.
I'd say that we try and keep a year-round conversation with the bar, not just during the time when submissions are prepared, but also throughout and afterwards. And I would also point out that we have added our Rising Stars section, which first in the most recent 2021 edition of the guide, covering those from 4 to 8 years full, and it has been sort of quite a thing to see that there's a new generation coming in, sort of starting their careers at the independent bar, which may perhaps be more diverse than previous generations, and it's great to see the talent there, because the future of the independent bar is very safe in their hands.
Thank you. The next question I have is also on statistics, and it's what percentage of your researchers are BAME or people of colour, particularly those who are in the rankings team?
Okay, so we don't have this information to share externally at the moment on a team-by-team basis. As I mentioned earlier, we are very much looking into where we too as an organisation can improve. We're preparing our ethnicity pay gap report, and we're also, as I mentioned, monitoring who is applying for the roles, versus who's successful. We also have our Black Focus group as well, as our cultural inclusion group too. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, we've been putting on various events in terms of educating and empowering our researchers. But again, I'm afraid I can't share the data at the moment.
Likewise, we do not have these statistics. However, I would point out that the Legal 500 research team does include some use of freelancers, and also the Legal 500 research team will include people who work on the bar for part of the year, and also additionally on the EMEA and Asia Pacific guides. The other point that I'd add on this question is that the person who does the interviews, who is listed in the documents, is the person who is at first instance responsible for making the ranking decisions, which are then presented to the editor.
Okay, so the next question that we have is around the leave policies that you guys have mentioned, and it's for a specific situation. So it says here, the Chambers and Partners leave policy, for example, states that they provide 2 years for primary caregivers. So how do you deal with a situation where someone has children in quick succession, and who could they possibly get in touch with specifically to discuss those points if they find themselves in that situation? So they've given the Chambers and Partners example, but obviously we're asking both teams.
Sorry, Eleanor, if you wanted to go.
Oh, I think it's just quite a quick answer. So it's kind of 2 years for a primary caregiver per period of related leave. So I guess in this example, per child. There, I think in our policy, we've got a kind of phrase about other extenuating circumstances. So any other situations, please do let us know. You can either put a note in the submission or ask, whoever's compiling the submission to put a note in there so that we see, and that's confidential, or you can just get in touch with myself or Eleanor Crondwell and just let us know. The most important thing I think is that we know, and then we can take it into account rather than not knowing.
At the Legal 500, what we would say is if you've been out of practice due to parental leave or something similar, or sick leave, for instance, in the past 12 months we're looking at, just mention it in the submission and we'll protect your ranking. It's as simple as that.
Thank you for that. The next question is it true that if you've been refused twice previously in your application, you'll be refused automatically on your third application or thereafter?
No.
That was easy. All right, so we've had a few questions around case lists and how to present them. So what I'll do is I'll put two of them together. So the first question is, how much detail should you go into for a case? Because the word limits can make it difficult to explain very technical or legally complicated cases. And the second is, if a ranking has been achieved in the previous year, then what process is used to decide if a higher ranking should then be awarded in subsequent years? So what sorts of cases would you then be looking for to push people into the higher ranking sections?
Okay, so the first part of that, yeah, I think we are looking for something fairly concise, because obviously just the volume of cases that we're comparing is very high. So the key things to put in there are why it's important. So if you were, explaining verbally to someone, you say, I did this case and it was great because, that's what we want. If it is very technical and you have to put in lots more details, then that's fine. But I think ideally you'd kind of have a summary in there, as if you were explaining, more to kind of a lay client sort of perspective. So that we can kind of see quickly what's so great about that case. And yeah, in terms of kind of moving up the rankings, it's really just the same process as getting in the guide. So again, we're comparing the work, we're comparing the information we get from the referees and from others in the market, other instructing solicitors who we speak to in the course of research, and other barristers as well, of course. So it's all about the comparative sort of process. So if you're in band 3 and you want to be in band 2, we'll be comparing your cases, your the feedback we get about you with all the other barristers who are submitting for that section. So there's not kind of like a tick box, or there's not a certain number of people that can be in each band either, but it's just a case of, if your feedback is saying, oh, this person should be in a much higher band, and all your instructing solicitors are saying, this person is amazing, then likelihood is you'll move up. But it's the same process as getting in for the first time, really.
For Legal 500 bar research, we would encourage a reasonable amount of technical detail within the confines of the submission document. We would typically hope and expect that the researcher who is covering it develops some degree of familiarity with the subject matter, if not having it when they start, because we aim to keep researchers on a practice area for some time if we can make that happen. So we do like sort of mention of the legal detail, any particular practical issues that made a case more difficult, for instance, sort of lengthy cross-examination of witnesses through interpreters or something like that. And when it comes to promotion, again, it's sort of a similar question to getting into the tables.
Thank you for that. I just have a couple more follow-up questions in respect of the case lists, because I think that's the part where we have to put in most of our energy. I mean, just writing down the referees' email addresses is quite quick. But with the cases that you're looking at, one of my questions would be, if you lost in the case, for example, would that count against you? And I have another question in respect of the sort of levels that you expect people to be at in order to be ranked. Now, of course, it depends on our call or our time in practice. But if someone, for example, was in the lower end of call, so let's say sort of 2013, 2012 and below, would you be expecting to see like Court of Appeal cases on there, Supreme Court cases, that sort of thing? Or would you be like, oh, that's not there, but that's absolutely fine, she's been in the High Court, that's great?
Yeah, so the first part of that, yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter if you've won or lost a case. I mean, I suppose as long as people don't say that the reason you lost was because you know, you handle it badly. But you know, obviously there's two sides, you know, someone's got to lose. So you know, no, that's not something that we're kind of keeping tabs on in that way. We'll just be kind of assessing the quality of the work and the commentary as usual. And yes, definitely differs per practice area, I would say, for, you know, the example you gave, Court of Appeal, etc. I think, though, that one of the good, might disagree, but one of the good things about the bandings and the up and coming category is that it kind of allows us to recognise people at whatever stage and with whatever cases they've got. I haven't really phrased that very well, but the reason for the up and coming category, for example, is if someone is, you know, 2014 call, we can kind of put them in there without having to necessarily compare their work with someone else we've got in band 1 who's doing Supreme Court work. Yeah, that's sort of rambled a little bit, but I think each kind of submission is taken on its own merits, and that's, you know, one of the points about the bands is that we can put people at different levels in different bands, and that kind of works for us.
Again, we would be sort of, it does depend on the practice area by practice area matter. I mean, it may be the case of, you know, sort of looking at housing law and competition law as different ends of a spectrum where we'd have differently calibrated expectations of whether someone would be led and what court they would be appearing in, whichever level of call. I would point out that our Rising Stars section is for those sort of roughly 4 to 7 years calls. So we do look for sort of juniors at that level, who we obviously appreciate that they will be perhaps doing more lead work. If they're doing unled work, it may be smaller, it may be for interveners on sort of, you know, larger cases, but we do obviously try to set our expectations realistically depending on each of the individual 60-odd practice areas we cover.
That's great. So actually we do have a specific question which has arisen around your categories for your rising star, new talent sort of areas. And the question is, what's the specific criteria that you're looking for that particular area? So I guess because the approach is slightly different for there, and for a lot of people that may be their first opportunity to get into the directories. So someone's thinking about pushing for submission in that sort of area, what are the factors that they should be looking at in their own practices which could highlight them as a potential rising star?
I would just say that the factors are kind of the same as for a non up and coming ranking. Again, the feedback, the work, etc. But it does just allow us to recognise people who are perhaps seen less frequently by their peers, or yeah, you know, being led on cases which are important, but perhaps again not the ones that we'd be seeing in kind of the main ranking table. It just for us, it just allows us to recognise people with that kind of lower bar, excuse the pun. So yeah, the process is the same, the things that we're looking at are the same, but it just means that we can recognise people who are slightly less experienced and therefore have less of a kind of backlog of work and kind of commentary behind them.
Very similar principles apply with the Legal 500. We have the cut-off for the upcoming edition that we're about to research is 2014 calls and newer for Rising Stars. They're all ranked in one tier, and what we aim to do is identify the sort of most promising talents using roughly the same metrics that we would use for the leading juniors table. However, these are for sort of, you know, those who we're very much aware are sort of going to be the sort of the next generation of star juniors, and hopefully sort of, you know, further down the line, the next generation of star silks.
Thanks. The next question is about London versus the other areas. London is of course full of loads and loads and loads of barristers, just like myself and Abby. So the next question we have is it true that it's easier to get into the rankings under circuit compared to London?
I would say that's not true. We research each circuit on its own, and we're just employing exactly the same techniques when trying to work out who should be ranked and in which bands. So it's just it's always just comparative with who else is in that market. Yeah, maybe slightly smaller cases happen on some of the circuits, so you don't necessarily need to be in the Supreme Court regularly to get a band 1 or a star ranking, but I wouldn't say it's easier. Maybe it's just that the markets are slightly smaller than in London, so you're a little bit more visible to your competitors. But I mean, it's definitely not easier. I mean, it's an achievement to get a ranking on any circuit, not just London.
Each circuit is researched sort of as its own discrete research process with the Legal 500. I would use terms like easier or harder, but we would obviously be understanding of the fact that work will often be of a different nature on each circuit, and there are regional differentiations between the sort of cases that you see in one area and the sort of cases that you might see in another.
And just a quick follow-up, if your practice is predominantly on circuit, but you're in a London chambers, can you apply on circuit rather than in London?
Yes, you can. We do prefer to rank people where they're based, but we can appreciate that often people do have a practice that is based on a different circuit but are based in their London chambers. The only thing we would say then is in the submission, just really highlight why you're applying on that circuit you're not based on. And we really want to see you working with the local solicitors and doing local cases to that circuit. Just don't include sort of your London work in your regional submission, just because we're not going to consider that, because obviously we want to keep the circuit.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but the sound quality has completely gone in your answer. So I don't know if everyone can make it out, but it's really crackly.
Oh really? Oh sorry. What was I saying? Just that. Yeah, you need to make sure. Was that better? No. You might have to take over.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it though. Anyway, yes, you can, but yeah, you just need to show us that is where your focus is and that you're being instructed by solicitors in that region. Show us your work in that region, and then we'll factor that into our research process.
Our regional research process does accept submissions from those who are London-based with practices on circuit, but to underscore, we do look to submissions to sort of demonstrate genuine commitment to work on circuit, such as work for local clients, deep relationships with local government bodies if they're providing the work, local solicitors. We sort of would not want to see the regional rankings used as a duplicates of other regions, but we do certainly consider those who are based in London chambers for the regional research if they can show that commitment.
Sorry, there was a bit of a gap there, my bad. Next question, do you take into account that in some areas of law, a barrister might often be up against litigants in person, and that there may be little or no lead work?
Yes, again, this is all these sorts of situations. You're very welcome to kind of tell us on the submission. These are things like, as long as we know, it won't kind of count against you in any way. It's just good for us to know, so please let us know if it means that your work, as you say, is slightly different to others, or if it means that you have fewer referees or something like that. Just let us know, and we can take that into account when we kind of compile everything at the end.
I would agree with that. And as someone who sort of chaired a roundtable some time ago on the subject of litigants in person at the bar, I'm aware that a number of matters that involve litigants in person can become quite difficult, to put things mildly. So if you've had any particularly challenging matters involving litigants in person, I'd strongly encourage you to put in the submissions of the challenges that you faced there and overcame, because that is the sort of thing that researchers would find very interesting as an example of a case that sort of has its own difficulties there.
Is there's a few questions which have come up, and really I think what they do is they are about particular types of practices that people may have. So I'll try and group them together. So one of the questions that we have here, for example, is how do you tailor your research processes when you're considering submissions from sole practitioners as opposed to chambers with multiple members? And another question, which is what about barristers who mostly do direct access work? How does a ranking system work in such cases? So in other words, if somebody has a non-traditional setup, whether that's working as a sole practitioner, whether that's mostly doing direct access work, what sort of steps do you guys take to make the process as applicable to them as those with the traditional setups?
Well, I think really our research process is pretty much the same no matter what, in the sense that you'll get the same kind of level of consideration, and your submissions and referees will all be looked at and contacted in the same way. If you are a sole practitioner, it kind of just means that in our phone interviews, we'll just focus more on you. Obviously, for the bar guide, we do this anyway on the individual barristers, but then in a kind of traditional set of chambers scenario, we'd ask about the clerking and the client service. But if you're a sole practitioner, we'll very much focus on you. And yeah, I mean, any other situation really, we pretty much research in the same way, except for in our interviews, we'll tailor them to that particular situation. And for things like if you do a lot of direct access work, again, that's just something you can flag on the submission, so that we kind of know that we're not going to be looking out for lots of feedback from instructing solicitors, because it just won't be there, and we can take that into account. I think the good thing about we don't have a kind of list of number of comments that we need to get per person or anything like that. And the good thing about that is that it means we can take these things into account.
We would, when it comes to a sole practitioner, we would view the practice of a sole practitioner like we would a barrister who is a member of chambers from their individual ranking perspective. But when it comes to the clerking sections on the submission template, just feel free to just mention you're a sole practitioner, and we'll certainly bear that in mind. When it comes to direct access work, we're aware that in all its forms, it's very much a feature of life at the modern bar in quite a lot of areas of practice. When it comes to referees, there are some direct access clients who will be appropriate to act as referees, and there are some who it may not be. So we would certainly bear that in mind. Corollary of that is that if it was a matter that involved particular client handling challenges, we certainly would be interested to hear about that in the submission when it comes to mentioning the detail of a case.
So I think we're coming towards the end of the session. There are a few questions which are left, but I think actually looking through them, I think Tash and I agree that actually a lot of those elements have been covered through the answers you guys have provided, the thorough answers you guys have provided to the previous questions. There was one follow-up that I had to, oh, sorry, Tash.
Go on, Abby. No, I was going to say there is one that's in the chat
Okay.
about new chambers that we could also ask as well. But
great, so I'll ask this follow-up one and then we'll do that one after. So a lot of the answers which have come through, particularly when people are highlighting aspects of their practice which are non-traditional, is where on the form should they highlight the fact that maybe they don't have the non-government clients, they won't have as many referees, and so on. So where exactly on the form should they put that information?
Well, for us, if you are a sole practitioner, just one person submitting on your own, you can pretty much put it anywhere because we'll see it. We'll read the whole thing. It doesn't matter where, in bold, not in bold. It doesn't matter to us. If you're in a set of chambers and you're submitting alongside, 30 other barristers, in your individual section would be best. So there's that bit where it's got your name and the details of your cases. In your brief description of your practice, you can put it in there because then it's obviously most closely linked to your name. But we do look over the entire submission, so really it doesn't matter too much where, as long as it's there.
We would suggest that the career summary box at the top of your submission, again, like that.
Great. Okay, all right, Tash, I'll do it.
It's because you unmuted yourself, so I was just like, okay, so Abby wants to do it, so she must.
We started off so smoothly, and then we just kind of like lost our rhythm slightly, but it happens at 7 o'clock on Monday. All right, so the last question that we're going to ask you guys before we move over to a quick summary is, so I think it feeds into the way that you guys have answered the sole practitioner questions, but I'll ask it anyway. How do barristers from small, unknown, or even virtual chambers increase their visibility into a band? So, for example, is there a minimum limit to the number of barristers in a set? So I think I can guess what the answer is, which is probably going to be there's no minimum limit, and that you guys would encourage them to apply, and if they have questions, get in touch with you. But I'm going to ask you it anyway, just to let you say that in your own words.
Yes, that's right. Yes, definitely. And I think in the presentation I was kind of saying that any information is good information for us. So, drop us an email when you first set up your new organization. Just let us know anything and everything as and when, including in the kind of formal submission process. And you can submit with any number of barristers. The only thing I would say is that if you are hoping to gain a ranking for your set organization, we would be looking to include a good number of barristers in that practice area first, or to get a set ranking, if that makes sense. So in order to get a ranking as a set, you would need several rankings, depending on the practice area, of individual barrister rankings.
The key thing I'd identify for any sort of new organisation wishing to participate is to participate. That is the key thing. If you set up as a new chambers, please just contact me, let me know, and we will take things from there. I'd also mention that when it comes to virtual chambers, we're aware that they're very much a growing thing, and we are very happy to receive submissions from them. And when it comes to sole practitioners, we are very interested to hear from sole practitioners, and we'll, as I mentioned, rank them as individuals equally with individuals in larger sets. The only observation I would make is that realistically, when it comes to the set rankings, we are looking for some degree of strength in depth and varied seniority. So it's quite unlikely that a sole practitioner would get a set ranking, but there's no reason why a sole practitioner can't succeed in the individual rankings by any stretch of the imagination.
Great, I've unmuted first. All right, so thank you so much, guys. I think this has been a really informative event, and I've certainly picked up a lot of information. I think the clear kind of theme that I've picked up from this is that you guys are far more flexible than maybe perceived, and that really, if in doubt, get in touch with anyone from either of your directories, and that you're keen to listen and to hear and to work around people's particular situations. So Tash and I have just kind of sent some quick messages to say what we think that some good summary points are. So what I've picked up on is certainly that you're keen to hear from people, to raise things, to include things, and that you guys are definitely trying to be more holistic in terms of the approaches that you're taking, and more holistic in your understanding of barristers and their work, and how to pick up on elements that may encourage people to be included in the rankings. Tash?
I think one thing that I've picked up in particular is much is practice area specific. So a lot of the questions that have been asked about what should be included in terms of case lists and things like that, what's good and what's bad, some of it is literally specific to the practice area that you're dealing with, and your level of call and experience. Also, make sure your referees will respond. I think that's a key, particularly with chambers and partners, perhaps because you can only put in 5 referees. And also that you, both directories have an eye to diversity, which is really important. And I know that I can say that the Black Barristers Network would be more than happy to speak to you guys further outside of webinars, as well as in future webinars about diversity and perhaps our ideas and how things could get even better. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and a big shout out and thank you to Garden Court for hosting by allowing us to use the Zoom. If you have any questions about this event, about BBN, please do get in touch with us, and also get in touch with Chambers and Partners and the Legal 500. Thank you so much to the representatives of Chambers and Partners and Legal 500 for giving up your Monday morning and a bit of Boris Johnson's announcement for today's event. And thank you so much to my fabulous co-chair, Abby, for just being fabulous, as she always is.
Oh, Tash, thank you. And guys, if you're not already on our mailing list, do make sure that you sign up, because we've got some exciting events coming up over the course of this year. And the best way to find out about those is through email and following us on Twitter, which is @BBN_tweets. Thank you, guys.
Have a good evening. Bye.